fixed step progression where the general increase is it in terms of movement through the range. The red fonts for the numbers themselves indicate across the board are general increases, and the red shading reflects those states where there were years of salary reductions. And again, across this period, particularly in this most recent contract term, Pennsylvania's corrections officers have done better than the median across the 11 states, and have not seen the kind of cost containment yet that most of the other states have put into place as a result of this recession.
Thank you, sir. We're going to take a short 5-minute break. And we'll be back. All right, does the association have any questions for the witness?
Mr. Nadel, we talked earlier. I'm again going to ask you some questions. If you don't understand, just ask me to clarify. Do you understand that? Okay. Now, I'd like to talk to you first about slide number 39, which is, I believe it's the last slide. You have indicated across that slide, and the reason I want to talk to you about that is because this is, at least there may be other ones, but this one, I believe, has every state that you have done some comparables to throughout your presentation, correct?
Correct.
All right. So starting with West Virginia, and I think you've already testified to this, West Virginia does not have collective bargaining rights. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And sliding over to Virginia, Virginia would be in the same case. They don't have collective bargaining rights? That's correct. All right. Now, Ohio, I think you confirmed before, they do have collective bargaining rights?
That's correct. I must acknowledge I have not tracked all of this year's legislative developments in Ohio closely, but the agreement reflected here was negotiated with a union pursuant to their collective bargaining rights.
Okay. So the 2010, 2011, and 2012 agreement for Ohio?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, isn't it
reached in 2009.
All right. But isn't it fair to say that, and I think you've admitted this already, that that you're not aware that certain states have, including Ohio, have done away with the rights of their state employees to bargain collectively?
I'm not sure. Could you clarify that?
Sure. When I'm looking at Ohio here, the pay freeze that I'm seeing in Ohio is due to the fact that the governor pushed legislation through that took the collective bargaining rights away from its state employees. This zero was not collectively bargained.
This was collectively bargained in an agreement from 2009.
Okay.
Forward.
And you're not aware that subsequently that agreement was done away with by the governor through legislation?
I have a general awareness that Ohio is a state where the governor is seeking to limit collective bargaining rights. I have not tracked those legislative changes. This set of terms was negotiated prior to that.
Mike looks died.
Maybe you could just switch to the other one.
You talk too much.
You got to insert a quarter, I think, in there to get it going again. Now, moving on to New York, your slide indicates that they are in the process of arbitration.
That's correct.
All right. And are you aware that in New York that they have budgeted general wage increases for 2010, 2011, 2012 of 3%?
No. My understanding is that for 2010 and 2011, what has been budgeted, not for 2012, is on the one hand, there is a budgetary set-aside consistent with a pattern reached by other state bargaining units prior to the full onset of the recession. And that does include across-the-board increases of 3%, 4% in those years. On the other hand, it's my understanding that the state has budgeted over $400 million in labor savings from concessions for layoffs that are part of offsetting the different expenses associated with that pattern, and the outcome of how those dual provisions on the part of the state, how that plays out in arbitration is yet to be seen. Again, as I testified this morning, there's only one group that has settled going forward with the new governor's administration in New York, and that group settled by receiving the pattern for the prior years, but prospectively agreeing to a 3-year wage freeze, 2-year step freeze, and significant increases to employee premium cost sharing for health benefits. So again, it's not yet determined how that shakes out, but that one part of what's been budgeted is only a part of the story.
Okay. And in regard to New York, you have blanks there because the correctional officers are in current arbitration for their contract, correct?
That's correct.
Now, New Jersey, we know from your previous presentation earlier this morning, does have collective bargaining rights. And curiously, this morning, and I know you don't have the slide in front of you, but this morning at slide number 20, you had talked about cost containment measures that states were implementing. Do you recall that testimony? And you mentioned New Jersey, and you mentioned that New Jersey in 2009 reopened the contract to defer scheduled wage increases. Do you remember that testimony? Now, curiously, you didn't mention in your earlier testimony the fact that the correctional officers in New Jersey are getting a 2% general wage increase effective January 1st of 2011, correct?
That's deferred from, it would have been paid earlier. It was deferred with no retroactivity to help them limp through budget challenges at the tail end of the prior governor's administration in New Jersey. So it was pushed out into this new period of time.
And Governor Christie, you have listed here, fiscal year 2011, New Jersey correctional officers are getting 4%?
That's the effect of the remaining provisions, including the deferral in the collective bargaining agreement that carried over.
Okay. Now, Michigan, is that a state that has collective bargaining rights?
Yes.
And you used Michigan because there were Pennsylvania inmates currently housed in Michigan?
The Michigan actually fell into two of the different categories. It is a state where Pennsylvania has a number of out-of-state housing placements. It's also a large state within the Northeast Midwest, meeting the criteria basically put forward by Dr. McCarthy.
All right. And the Maryland comparison here, do they have collective bargaining rights in Maryland?
They They have collective bargaining, but it's subject to the budget process in the state, such that wage terms can be directed outside of bargaining.
So the legislature can override any agreed-upon wage increases?
Effectively.
Okay. In Indiana, what about their collective bargaining rights? Do they have any?
That's not even state.
Okay. Illinois? What about Illinois?
Illinois is.
Now, Illinois, I see that in 2010, 2011, 2012, we have wage increases of 4.6%, 4%, and 5.3%. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is that a 3-year contract that they're currently under?
I don't recall the contract.
All right. And does Delaware, do they have collective bargaining rights in Delaware?
They do, but it's somewhat akin to Maryland in that there is the ability for legislative determination. Historically, through some of this period, they did not have the bargaining rights. Bargaining rights in Delaware are still emerging to some degree.
So when you did this compensation comparables with these other states, you didn't take into consideration the extent of the collective bargaining rights, the extent of binding interest arbitration that the employees had in those particular states, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So you had an opportunity to review Dr. McCarthy's presentation. Did you recall her specifically saying that she looked at other states that had collective bargaining rights?
I'm sorry.
Do you recall Dr. McCarthy specifically saying that she limited her comparables to states that had collective bargaining rights?
She made statements along those lines. Just reading the transcript, not having been in the room, I wasn't completely clear about her position in that regard. She stated that Delaware and Maryland don't have unions. They do, albeit it's a different bargaining process there. So again, it wasn't completely clear to me how she applied those criteria, but she did reference unionization as one of her factors, yes.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this. You talked about the career opportunities, that's slide 7, and you talked about the fact that correctional officers are afforded opportunities for competitive advancement. You stated things of that nature. Now, when you talk about CO1, CO2, and obviously you're aware of this because you talked about the overtime opportunities that those two classifications are afforded, you're aware that a CO3, CO4, CO5, lieutenant, captain, major, respectively, do not have overtime opportunities.
That's my understanding.
Okay. So when you look at the maximum base that they're afforded there, you're not going to be able to add overtime to that if you're trying to calculate what their overall, at least, compensation would be salary-wise.
Cash overtime?
Right. All right. Now, you talked about, in slide number 10, you talked about comparing a PSCOA employee to county employees throughout the state, and you used the residents 25 years plus.
County residents, not county employees.
Okay.
General members of the community in each of those counties. Yes, with that, beyond that age level.
Okay. And is that, when you talk about, was that the only category? They just had to be 25 years plus?
These are the median earnings for adults age 25 or older in each of those counties, yes.
So when you did that comparison, you didn't look at educational background, experience, anything?